Eileen gave me a nice segue, so I guess we can use that as our cue to move forward. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'm so glad to see you all for Module 3 for our Science Policy and Advocacy series. Tonight we have some awesome panelists here to join us, but before we do that, just to go in a quick overview. So we are at Module 3 here. We're making our way. Our focus tonight, of course, STEM education and workforce development. Some announcements. We do have a lot of you who have already submitted the podcast's summary, so thank you. We're working on getting you feedback for those of you who have submitted it. If you do want any feedback on that, the due date is coming up soon for that by, I believe, May 24th. We'll also send up a follow-up email with all the dates and reminders. Adriana is going to make a quick announcement on policy pitch outline and write-up outline.
Yeah, so I think there's been some confusion on these two assignments. We've now updated the syllabus and the assignment sheet to reflect both of these and the links for submission. So there are two different things. One is for the policy pitch, which is the oral pitch you'll give later in the program. And then the write-up is for op-ed or memo that you're doing. So we will ask you to do this just as good practice to start to outline your assignments now before we start to send it out for reviewers. So that's what those things are. And happy to answer more questions by email or Slack on that.
Thank you also to folks who submitted questions for our panelists for today. And so we had some really great questions and we integrated those in. So we really appreciate you getting those submitted. And I know the panelists do as well. So we were able to get those to them and they could prep some thoughts so that it's customized more for you today and what you're wanting to hear about. So we appreciate that. We do have some great interactions on Slack over the past week of people introducing themselves. Please take a look at that. These are people who are in similar situations as you, interested in similar things. And so use this to grow your community and your network. And so keep engaging there. We'll also post just kind of general updates and stuff on there. So again, please let me know if you're still not connected onto Slack. You shouldn't be having to pay for anything. There's the general channel that is free to everyone to use. Keep using the SciPolicy Gmail account for questions. So a lot of you have submitted there, and that's really easy for us to be able to then quick respond to you. So thanks for doing that. And I have sent out an email with the YouTube recording link, and I'll send it out again. But we're going to be posting all of our recordings there. And so last week, for those who couldn't join the writing module, that was a really great interactive session and got folks thinking. And so that's on there if you wanted to take a look. And I'll get tonight's on there soon as well. So that is a chance for you to catch up or to revisit things that were important to you. All right, without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our moderator for tonight, Mariama, which is our one of our program coordinators. So I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, welcome everyone. So our module today will be introduced by Dr. Adriana Bankston. Dr. Adriana Bankston is the co-director of our certificate program, and she's also the CEO of the Bankston Policy Consulting and a former Society for Neuroscience Policy and Advocacy Fellow. This year, Adriana was selected as the inaugural AAAS STPFS Association of Genetics. What was it, Adriana, the association that can you clarify? I just saw the the quotes, but pretty much she will be working as a congressional policy fellow starting in the fall of 2024. Well, she will provide science-based independent guidance to federal policymakers on Capitol Hill. So thank you, Adriana. Go take it away, please.
All right, thank you very much. So welcome to our Module 3 on STEM education and workforce development. This is near and dear to my heart for many years, so excited to give an introduction here today. So I wanted to frame this a bit, as we'll hear from our panelists on a number of different topics, provide some context in what we'll discuss today. So for broader context, there are many different players within the policy ecosystem, including universities, government agencies, and scientific societies working together to improve policy to create a better society. And education policy plays a critical role, and also both for our nation's competitiveness in science and technology, and also for engaging students from different backgrounds and different levels within our scientific and research ecosystem. And so my goal, and really what I'll be hammering here today, is to kind of look backwards from the workforce that we want to create and the type of workforce that we want to see, who is not represented, and how does education need to reflect that and train workers for different jobs and the workforce of tomorrow. So for me, having worked on STEM education and workforce issues for years, the workforce is really the crux to all that we are doing in the sciences. And I think we have a responsibility to build a workforce that reflects the diversity of this country in a lot of ways. And also I want to particularly emphasize people doing research and moving our country forward in science. Fostering a workforce that is diverse and what we want to see is will require systemic changes in many ways that I want to bring up. A couple of panelists will expand on that, but my remarks will be more high level and hopefully setting the stage for further discussion today. One thing to emphasize is there are multiple pathways into the workforce. At the undergrad, K through 12, grad school, technical colleges, and all these different levels going into the workforce. It's no longer a linear path, right? So we need to be prepared to train our researchers and students at all levels to be able to be prepared when they graduate and leave the lab. So with this context, there is a complex policy ecosystem, and just want to frame this a bit in terms of some of the topics that the speakers will cover and questions that I would like us to think about today. So for a lot of us, this starts in academia. We're in the lab. Universities, of course, produce research talent that needs to get hired. And so one question would be how universities need to prepare trainees for various careers, ensuring that they're ready for the labor market. And also how we can support trainees to thrive beyond research dollars. So a lot of the work, a lot of things we talk about in policy are how much money goes to research, but also how do we support them in terms of mental health and other things that are often overlooked? How do we think about the talent pipeline, what this looks like, including postdocs, and ensuring that we're able to keep them in research, or if they leave, what that looks like and why we're losing talent from science. How do we engage students in STEM early on, right? So the other side of this is who is not in the field that we want to see, again, from early on, undergrads, K through 12, and so on. And of course, universities also produce scientists that leave and influence other sectors, including government. So from my role and having been in policy for a while, I want to also encourage you all to get involved in the change that we want to see, not just look at and talk about systemic changes and things that we want to see happen, but actually get involved and do something. And government is one way to do that. And on the other side, governments, of course, are looking for scientific expertise. So I think training students who want to participate in public service, even if they're early on in their education, is important. So we can look at it from that lens too, that we are training future leaders in policy. So I know many of you have ideas around policy change and what you want to see from what you've submitted so far. And so I'm excited to see where those ideas go. But I think sort of bringing this together to think about how different players work together to develop the best possible education and workforce pipeline. So a few trends, I think part of what I'm supposed to cover is what kind of trends have we seen in education and workforce? Of course, that's a large topic. So just a few things more recently that I think are important. One is how research can be supported to allow engagement of students from all backgrounds in the field. We've talked a little bit about this before, the balance between basic and applied research as this is developing with the NSF TIP Directorate, but there is a large discussion of how basic research will be impacted. And also sort of spreading the wealth or R&D, not to just R1s, but also emerging research institutions, HBCUs and MSIs, and moving into the middle of the country away from the coast and also to rural areas to reach students that don't have opportunities, and also different types of institutions, some being more research intensive, some being more teaching intensive, all which are needed, and we're not taking advantage of all the opportunities that exist. One thing to mention, and where this has come into focus more in the last several years, is with the CHIPS and Science Act, which is a major piece of legislation that has facilitated some of this expansion in education. One of the things is also moving from the federal to the state level, where a lot of the implementation of these provisions is taking place, particularly through the National Science Foundation, the nationwide expansion of research funding and training, job creation, economic development, and so on across the country. So I'm going to mention a couple of programs that are relevant to this. One is the EPSCoR program, which is very long description, established program to stimulate competitive research, collaborations for optimizing research ecosystem, infrastructure, and improvement program. It enhances state-level research and developing competitiveness and promotes scientific progress nationwide in several states. Some of the EPSCoR grants were awarded recently. And this was established from a 2022 report studying EPSCoR. There's other resources out there. And it aims to build capacity in more targeted research infrastructure cores. Again, you can read more about that, but it's an important program to consider. Some of these programs at NSF target STEM researchers and K through 12 teachers and students to help create a pipeline, again, at the state level to contribute to the national pipeline, and connecting also to individuals that are geographically isolated to STEM education at the pre-college level and other levels. The second one is, and getting close to the end here, NSF Excellent Program. It's experiential learning for emerging and novel technologies. So it's meant to expand learning opportunities for individuals interested in entering or gaining more experience in emerging and novel technology areas, promoting also partnerships between organizations in emerging technology fields and those with expertise in workforce development. There's a lot of discussion about the importance of partnerships in this ecosystem. And additionally, NSF programs that connect skills to jobs, right? Coming back to this, how do we really connect this back to education? And I won't go too much into this, but one thing is micro-credentialing that uses partnerships between higher ed and employers to co-develop industry-valued skills and knowledge. And we can also talk about different fields where specific groups are underrepresented, for example, computer science, where women are underrepresented, and in other fields as well. So I'm hoping some of this will come out of the conversation today, and hopefully it's a useful introduction.
So Adriana, we have a few minutes for questions. And one question that I had is, what areas do you think will be the ones that we should focus on if we want to engage in the field?
Yeah, good question. So I guess going back to this broad point that we want, what do we want the workforce to look like? That's where it would start from. What do we want it to look like? Who's currently missing? How do we reach those people that we feel are not included in science and research? That maybe, I think, understanding what the reasons are, right? So postdoc pay, for example, is low, and we're losing valuable talent. So what are the really important issues and the reasons why that's happening? Why are there so few women in computer science, for example? And what will it actually take to move the needle on workforce development, right? So hopefully panelists will cover that. I think again, as I said, a lot of the work has been focused, including legislatively, on research funding. So I think emphasizing more of the training and professional development for students in postdoc and mental health, and really systemic changes that support sort of holistic development of trainees and scientists who are in research. What does that look like, and what does that mean in a policy context? I think other things relate to how education has changed in four-year colleges or two-year colleges, community colleges, and also more emphasis, again, on different ways of training for people that are not in R1s, from maybe away from four-year degrees to certificates, micro-credentials, and other things like that. So, right, so we're getting into the weeds of this, but I think that trainees are looking for different ways to gain skills and knowledge, and I think the field is somewhat moving in that direction. So we'd love to hear the panelists unpack that a bit more. For the policy changes, I think if we want to think more about what Congress should do, what government should do, and what their role is in this, right? In terms of some of the legislation that's enacted. And also still, I think even now we're still feeling the impacts of the pandemic on education and online education, right? And that has served many folks who don't have access otherwise, but also I think that it's led to a shift in education as well.
And I have another question, unless anybody else wants to ask. But for me, I always think about the science policy initiatives that can be developed, and how can we tailor an initiative to promote more workforce development, including micro-credentialing, other things that you'll be talking about, particularly for underrepresented or under-researched groups or people that are in rural areas.
Yeah, so a few ideas. I think in universities, there are obviously often students organize events around sort of bottom up, right, including or teaching policy to students at those groups. That's often seen and has grown a lot across the country. And, trainees are taking this into their own hands and building the tools to train their peers. To speak of partnerships as well, because I think we talk a lot about universities and how they train the next generation, but thinking more about developing partnerships between universities, industry, and government, inviting potentially industry and government folks to speak to women in science, right, or girls who are interested in staying in the field, that you can leave the bench and that these are careers that they can pursue. And again, we can hopefully reassure them that they'll be valuable in these different careers and see themselves in the pipeline, right?
Thank you so much. So now we would like to start the panel. So I will start by introducing our speakers. So we have here Dr. Gary Dowell. He is the CEO and founder of Lightoller LCC, a consultancy that provides expertise on STEM education and training. Gary has a master's in chemistry and a PhD in oncology, both from the University of Cambridge. He carried out postdoctoral research at Children's Hospital and Tufts University, and with his company, he's been doing a lot of work to improve the life of grad students and postdocs. Welcome, Gary. And the next person I will introduce is Dr. Iris Wagstaff. She is the STEM Program Director for ICID at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. Iris Wagstaff is a chemist, educator, mentor, research, and science policy advisor, and she currently manages a $30 million portfolio focused in broadening participation in STEM. Welcome. Additionally, we have Otto Kant. He is a principal and workforce practice group chair for Louis Burke Associates. Otto provides strategic guidance on legislative, administrative, and regulatory issues at the Department of Education and the Department of Labor, in addition to other federal agencies. He leverages his professional knowledge and expertise gained working in the K-12 space and at the state and federal policy level. Thank you, Otto, for being here. And then, the last person, but not least, is Wendy, Dr. Wendy Ingram. She is the CEO of Dragonfly Mental Health, a global nonprofit dedicated to cultivating the excellent mental health among academics worldwide. In only 4 years, Dragonfly has developed and deployed evidence-based curriculum programming that reached more than 50,000 academics in 22 countries through the delivery of more than 330 talks and workshops. So Dr. Ingram received dual degrees from the University of Arizona in biochemistry and molecular biophysics and psychology. She received her PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and she was a National Science Foundation Research Fellow. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. So, to build on Adriana's introduction, we would like to talk about the current problems and issues in STEM education and the reforms that you all believe that should be developed to encourage STEM training. So what policies do you each work on related to STEM education and workforce development? And maybe I see Iris first, so maybe you can go first and then, sorry.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hear me? Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I love to speak with students. Actually, I may have to step away because I am working on a huge policy issue right now, a very urgent proposal to the NSF that has to be in tomorrow, but I didn't want to cancel on you all. So I may have to step away because I have great managers on deck. So that is an example of my day, my week. So I am a STEM program director at the AAAS. A lot of people haven't heard of AAAS. Most people know us through Science Magazine, but that is the publishing side. I'm actually on the nonprofit side because AAAS is a nonprofit that has a for-profit piece. So basically, I run national programs, and my portfolio is on broadening participation in STEM, which is broad in scope in itself. So in that role, PI on 5 NSF grants and co-PI on a number of other grants that all, again, focus on broadening participation in STEM. So 2 of my key areas are the Emerging Researchers National Conference in STEM, which is a conference where I support 1,000 undergraduate and graduate researchers to come present their research. 90% are underrepresented minorities. And then I also run AAAS's only HBCU innovation initiative where we focus on advancing innovation capacity at HBCU. So kind of like broadly, the issues are, I see in kind of 3 areas as far as like big policy. So K-12 is all about preparation, and the issues and challenges are different at each level. My background is actually in K-12 STEM education research. So I taught teachers how to teach STEM from a culturally relevant perspective. I've been doing outreach in the community, creating informal science programs for 30 years. So there's that whole preparation pipeline pathway piece. And then there's the actual training piece, which Adriana mentioned, undergraduate, graduate, postdoc level. That has its own set of issues. It was definitely highlighted over the pandemic. George Floyd, a lot of the racial inequities, social justice inequities were highlighted. Even just kind of resource issues at universities about not knowing how to teach students online. So then the third piece is the whole workforce piece, right? So, we have some challenging problems nationally and globally. We need to engage all of our human capital, which we are not. And that is why we still have an underrepresentation issue. So kind of like those are the 3 pieces and areas that I see. And first of all, I want you all to give yourselves a hand. You all should applaud yourselves for just being at something like this because we need you. We need your talent. We need your time, your expertise, and we need the expertise that you are developing to address these issues because we need to hear your voice. So that's just kind of a quick a quick recap of those areas. I would say specific STEM areas. Again, we know the numbers according to the National Science Foundation. African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, persons with disabilities. I also manage a disability effort to support students with disabilities and also to support student well-being. I mean, we know the numbers, we know the issues, still grossly underrepresented, and especially in some areas like the physical sciences, the tech areas. Those areas continue to be underrepresented. So when we talk about like broadening participation, again, it's really broad. Do you want to focus on that K-12 piece? Do you want to focus on really changing the minds of these gatekeepers who are faculty in these institutions? So, you know, I have some suggestions about that as well, but it's really not, the issues aren't in really preparing students. Students are great. It's changing the faculty and the gatekeepers and the other folks, the ecosystem and the environments that turn, you know, women away and people like me, you know, away. So those are the real issues, which is the real hard work. So I would just kind of sum it up there.
Thank you so much. Gary or Wendy, I don't know who wants to go first. I think I have Gary first on my screen, so let's have you first.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Wendy. That was actually a great segue into, you know, most of what I work on is thinking about systemic change rather than changing the individual. And so I guess a major part of my policy work has been the postdoc, broadly, so much about the postdoc, but sort of its existence, the sort of philosophy around it, what needs to change about it. And again, I'm sort of questioning its existence now as a part of my sort of policy work, but also a lot of transparency about the position. You know, Iris talked about the numbers, and data collection about postdocs is pretty woeful, and it's very hard for us to make decisions on it, and particularly for underrepresented groups and minoritized groups who are there in smaller numbers. So there's a lot of my effort goes into things like just getting demographic data, data collection, and doing things like collecting data about salaries, and yeah, that kind of work. And then another part that's sort of related that has come more recently, you know, a lot of the postdoc work has made me very interested in why people postdoc. You know, people aren't really making necessarily rational decisions about doing a postdoc based on the data that there are about it. And so then it's interesting to think about why people postdoc or why people get into science altogether. And so that has really pushed me into more of an undergraduate focus as well. And so one branch of that is, again, thinking about more inclusive classrooms and supporting research on doing that. That's sort of one, there's a network that I sort of run with a group of other researchers trying to connect social scientists and anthropologists and psychologists and so on, trying to think about making more inclusive classroom spaces. And then related to that is finding ways of, you know, exposing the hidden curriculum for people who want to go into science, but also making science more transparent for those who may not go into science, but we want to be sort of science literate in the future. And that really focuses on scholarly publishing, peer review, and sort of how knowledge gets, you know, gets transferred from a lab into ultimately a textbook, and the processes between those two, which has now necessitated some advocacy around open access publishing for not only the students to get access to papers, but also myself, because that has been an issue, not being an institutional person and yet still doing NSF funded research and being unable to access current funded research. So so those are sort of broad themes of what I've been working on. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gary. Wendy, would you be able to go next?
Sure. So hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again. This has been a great group and a fabulous set of conversations in the past, so I'm happy to participate this year as well. Already the other speakers are just like, I'm scribbling down all kinds of information, and I will be contacting you all later. But so what my policy that I work on within STEM and STEM education is around mental health among STEM researchers. So we at Dragonfly Mental Health, which is an international organization, global, but 501c3 based in the US, we are focused on cultivating excellent mental health among academics worldwide. So we see the entire academic system globally as interconnected and you know, very directly related to everything and everyone from all levels. What we focus on are really the graduate student and above, so masters, PhDs, postdocs, and faculty, as well as the staff that support them kind of in that ecosystem. We focus on kind of the ecosystem within universities or academic or professional societies. And then what we do is, our vision is really that academics should be taking care of our minds the way that elite athletes take care of their bodies. And we are doing the polar opposite of that right now. So the current state of things is that graduate students are 6 to 8 times more likely to suffer from moderately severe to severe depression and anxiety. We are losing people to brilliant, wonderfully trained, wonderful human beings to suicide because they're not seeking care for, they're half as likely to seek care for a known, acknowledged mental health struggle they may have. Psychiatric disabilities are one of the most concealed, invisible disabilities that is highly stigmatized even within the disability sector. So there's a lot of things that are going on that we touch on and we look at across all career levels. We do tend, like I said, to focus on graduate, once people are in the graduate pipeline already, rather than undergrads or K through 12. But what we're doing is really kind of both grassroots and top down, kind of anywhere in the Jenga puzzle piece that we can find a piece ready to move, we're willing to move. So it's been a wild ride for the last 4 years, but it's been really wonderful. And we've, we're very focused on active inclusion, deliberate diversity, including people's voices. We engage in research as well as delivery of programs that are evidence-based, as well as rooted in lived experience. And we conduct research that is participatory of the community itself. So I'll kind of pause there. Happy to talk about lots more of what we do and how we do it.
Thank you so much, Wendy. So Ora, could you please talk next?
Yeah, and apologies, Zoom keeps kicking me off, so I'm going to do a phone and then we'll try to go back to the desktop. But thank you all for the opportunity to participate here. Sort of the wild card in that I'm the lone panelist without a PhD, but my day job is working with a government relations lobbying firm that participates in this ecosystem that Adriana talked about, and do everything from having worked on some of the legislation like the Chips and Science Act, advising institutions now on how to actually pursue and get those excellent grants and from NSF that were alluded to earlier. And just echo everything that the panelists have said. Policymakers are really trying to pay attention to how do we address K-12 education, how do we address issues like mental health, how do we incentivize public-private partnerships. Mental health certainly has been popping up more and more, not only in a K-12 sense, but also, what do we do at the post-secondary level as well? So, excited for the conversation today.
So I see a pattern in everything that you're saying. You're saying that we should focus on systemic change, that we should focus on mental health in the partnerships between businesses and the government and academia, as a way, maybe as a tool to improve the issues that are now, and also the ERA, inclusion, and so forth. And also also thinking of not only about the higher education, but also about K-12 and the role of teachers, also because we need more STEM teachers. So thank you. I want to dedicate some time for each of the topics that I'm seeing emerging, and I'll ask questions. So Gary, so you were talking about the reforms that are needed in STEM. So, are there any policy reforms or initiatives that could enhance the effectiveness of, the STEM apprenticeship? Sorry, I can't pronounce it, but apprenticeship and internship programs as pathways to workforce development. So what do you think about?
Yeah, I think a good way of thinking about this is that this is sort of what the postdoc is supposed to be, and I think a lot of the issue with the postdoc now is that it isn't. And so, in terms of faculty positions, and so it's a good way of thinking backward to earlier in career paths of what are things that can be pushed for. I think something that has become a bit more common is the sort of industry partnership that has been happening in internships and these kinds of things. And I think that the reforms on this, there's always been a conversation about the money, but I'm going to channel Iris again here on the attitudes of faculty a little bit, because I saw one of the major oppositions to those internships taking off in the past was not so much having the funding available, but letting people leave the lab of some faculty during their graduate program. And so unless you had very formal partnerships set up from the beginning with faculty who were willing, the sort of opt-in program of people joining was pretty difficult, and so I'm quite opposed. And I think that is part of the overall issue that needs tackled, particularly with postdocs, but even, with grad students and to an extent with undergrads now as well, is that there is this great reliance on people's labor to do the work in the labs. I also am speaking sort of from a biomedical perspective, is particularly intense in biomedicine. And so I think one of the biggest reforms needed is sort of thinking about how to structure those things and create allowances for people being able to take advantage of those. And I think another big topic, sort of perennial, has been awareness of doing these things and people seeing themselves in these roles. There's one example of something the NSF has just started that comes to mind, which is they have a new series of grants called, the acronym is Granted. And part of that is trying to look at the workforce around supporting research, and particularly at places that don't have a track record of securing funding. Sort of addressing the inequity that exists, that some institutions have really well-oiled machines at getting grants, applying for grants, going through the mechanics of it. I'm not just talking about the PIs, but actually the machinery that exists at university, support staff, the knowledge, right? And that varies across institutional type. And so there is this new initiative by NSF to try to provide funding to build up that the awareness about the workforce is a part of this. And it's super interesting because it's not a world I know very much about myself. And so it is interesting to see, trying to think about it with some of my colleagues of what this looks like. And so there is a bit of that shift of trying to direct resources and efforts towards those. Yeah.
So Iris, I was going to ask you a question next that is related to what was Gary's talking about. So, how do you think that science policy decisions can impact the availability of funding and resources for workforce development programs in STEM? So this is related, right? Sort of, how do we, ask that there's more funding for that, or, how is the impact?
Yeah, great question. We are citizens, we demand it. I came here to DC as part of the AAA Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. So I've worked in all four of the workforce sectors. I started as a research chemist in the chemical industry at Dow Chemical, spent 15 years there outside of Philadelphia, but I had always done outreach in the community. That's my passion. I still run outreach programs in my home state of North Carolina today, where I work with my high school chemistry teacher. We use gardening as context and agriculture as context to teach middle school students. So I started out in the chemical industry, spent 15 years, went back to grad school, got a PhD in this area.
I think we lost her for a second. So Otto, since you're here and she is slowing down, I actually had a question for you. So since, we're still in the same topic of sort of like, addressing the workforce development changes and sort of like helping trainees. So and internships and other opportunities. So what do you think that in what ways can science policy foster collaborations between academia, industry, and government to address these issues that we have been talking about?
I think it really does come to trying to convince policymakers of the importance of it. And I think the challenge is, I also have a K-12 background, spent some time as a middle school social studies teacher. And, our joke was always, everybody thought they were a education policy expert because they went to school. And so, you see, that's why you see everybody loves to do STEM K-12 legislation, and a lot of it's good, a lot of it moves, but you quickly run into, a lot of folks who don't have any familiarity with, undergraduate science or STEM education, and it gets even thinner once you get into the PhD plus level. I mean, I can think of a member like Bill Foster from Illinois, probably one of the few folks who, really gets it and whatnot. And so, I think it's really, making that case that, industry doesn't just get the talent that it needs, magically. That takes time, it takes investments, starting at the K-12 level. And, I've been asked to particularly talk about the CHIPS and Science Act. That's this was a seminal piece of legislation that passed in 2022, bipartisan, which is a rarity these days in DC. And we saw a lot of money, $52 billion, really to go out the door on semiconductor manufacturing. And there has been real attention to, hey, we need the research and development side, leading edge chips, et cetera. Well, the other part of the CHIPS and Science Act, the science part, got little to no funding. And in fact, actually, I know some folks, and Iris probably knows them as well, who've done the data. I mean, you look at what we call an authorized level. So the bill says spend this much, and we're billions of dollars behind, where we're aspirationally trying to be. So I think it really does, behoove, you all who are looking to shape policy to really make those connections for folks of, it's just not me sitting in my lab, doing science for science sake. I'm sure that's an aspect of it, but it really is like, how do we just get a more scientifically literate society? How do we make sure industry has the talent that it needs? How do we make sure we're doing this holistically and representatively and equitably as well?
So what policies have effectively incentivized participation of industry in workforce development programs? Like, since you mentioned, preparing the workforce, has there been any?
Yeah, Gary and Adriana alluded to it before. The Technology Innovation and Partnership Director at NSF. This was a brand new directorate, the first one created, I think, in about 50 plus years. Again, Adriana alluded to it, and you all, again, deferred for the PhDs in the room. Like, there are real questions of, how do we balance the basic fundamental with the applied research as well? But that whole program, I mean, you pick, any of the 10 or 12 programs there, the regional innovation engines, encourage individuals to really check that out. This was a massive proposed, again, authorized, 160 million over 10 years for, again, something that was mentioned before. How do we spread this geography innovation? We love San Francisco, Boston, and Austin, but how do we do this in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Raleigh, et cetera? So I think there's some coming around to it. I think framing it within economic development does bring the industry around, and that certainly, any member of Congress is going to want to be able to say, hey, I'm bringing jobs and bringing money to my district.
Thank you so much. So Iris, I know that you crashed, so do you want to follow?
Yep, sorry. Issues today. My computer won't let me be great. So the policy issue I was interested in, again, was broadening participation in STEM. So I wanted to combine this decades of outreach in a community, the informal science K-12 with supporting undergrad and graduate students. I mentor a lot of undergrad and grad students as well as early STEM professionals. So really trying to combine all of that. And again, the broader policy issue that I focus on is, again, broadening participation in STEM, which is very broad, but my different kind of expertise areas K-12, mentoring, technology, all of those areas I'm able to actually work on through the fellowship, which I was able to transition to AAAS. And I do want to plug that as a great opportunity. If you're interested in policy, definitely think about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. Congrats to Adriana for being selected. But that is what brought me here from North Carolina, the RTP area. I went back and got my PhD in STEM education research and policy in 2014, and then came here. So I definitely suggest that if you are interested. I think applications open May 1st and they end November 1st, but that is a great opportunity to engage in this work. And then I'll just mention a bit about industry because I come from an industry background. It's a pretty standard model and framework now for universities to have some type of industry, university partnership. The national academies, they're working in that area. A number of federal agencies are also partnering with industry. I think the community colleges have done a great job because they actually align with economic needs, right, in the state. So I think like the community college articulation agreements are a great model that I think universities can follow. But in general, what we've seen over the last 5 years, which has kind of been, it has been a good change from the federal agency and the industry part, is that they now have departments focused to STEM education, right? So industry, so Merck, now they actually focus on K-12 STEM education because they know they need to start at the K-12 level, right? You can't start at the undergrad and grad level and build a pool of talented people to get them into the pipeline. So a lot of the federal agencies as well have a whole STEM education unit and department now that they didn't have years ago. So I would say like the whole K-12 STEM education is a huge piece that industry is focusing on because they recognize they have to get people into the pipeline, right? So they do that a number of ways by offering like programs, sponsoring schools, sponsoring teachers. So there are a number of ways they do that at the K-12 level. And of course, at the undergrad and grad level, they have fellowships and scholarships and internships and those types of opportunities. I mean, the real challenge is, especially from a diversity standpoint, is like, okay, so if you work on those two areas, how do you change the hostile environments and atmospheres in the workforce sector, right? So that's a huge issue, even at the higher education level. Once you're able to get these K-12 students into these colleges and universities, what are you bringing them into, right? Hostile environments. Many times, like I can tell many stories and write many books about my experience. And the same thing, like once you get those folks into these positions, what kind of environments are you bringing them to? So that is the real challenging work, and it's the heavy lift.
So what policy initiatives can help, you think, with that systemic change we need so it's not such a hostile environment?
Yeah, I would say low-hanging fruit. I mean, it has to be from the top down, from leadership down. There has to be, first of all, a recognition, a recognition of the issues, a clear commitment and plan. That's a lot of the work I did at the National Institute of Justice, which wasn't even what I was supposed to work on when I was selected to be a fellow. I was supposed to diversify their STEM doctoral fellowship, and I wound up creating their first agency-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative that's still in place today at the National Institute of Justice. But I mean, it's not rocket science. It's, there's a recruiting piece, recruit. You can't just recruit at R1 universities, right? You say you can't find people from diverse backgrounds in all areas of STEM, and I have probably 10 girlfriends with PhDs that look like me in every area of STEM. So we're not lost. It's just you need to know where to recruit from. So go to those conferences and those universities that have students from diverse backgrounds. So there's like a kind of recruiting outreach piece that's low-hanging fruit. But again, I think there has to be a solid commitment in place. There has to be some type of diversity statement, maybe some diversity supplements, like whatever. If you really care about diversity, there are some easy things to put in place. Again, education and training, really making the case So where I started from since I'm a researcher, I was like, well, I know how to do research. I'm a chemist. Let me start with the research. Like, what is the research on diversity, equity, inclusion, right? So just really making the case, training and education, and really showing these organizations, institutions, and companies that, hey, if you want to continue to compete in a global, economy, you really have to make some changes. And there is a case, a business case for DEI, right? So you need to hear different voices, different perspectives. Diversity is a plus, right? It's not about numbers. So just really sharing the research, like what we know, Scott Page, all these other folks that have the similar research on making the business case for DEI. So that's where I started with that kind of work. But those are the kind of things that institutions, organizations, companies, federal agencies are a lot further along with this. And I would definitely say the NSF is a model by embedding these things and making them requirements in proposals and solicitations. There's a whole, broader impacts piece. There's diversity training. I also review for NSF, right? So we go through implicit bias training. So those are a bunch of things that can be done.
So thank you so much, Iris. And you mentioned about hiring. So what policy levers can be used to encourage the adoption of those like hiring practices that you were mentioning? I think sometimes they say, I can't find the person, as you were saying, that's not true. So how, what are the policy levers that we could try to do?
And just making sure you have a diversity and representation, right? That's like race, gender, sexual orientation, age, ADA status. But again, if you're not recruiting at the right places, you're not going to get the right, correct, a diversity in your returns, right? So just kind of low-hanging fruit. But what I found when I was trying to do this diversity work, which is a heavy lift, and you have the African-American female coming in to tell this agency all the things you're doing wrong. So just some of the things that I learned as science and technology policy fellow is how to really make the case, how to build consensus, how to build partnerships. So for example, at the NIJ, they wanted me to do these trainings, and I was like, no, I'm not going to call them trainings. Even though they were trainings, I just called them frank discussions. So just like changing the language, right, to try to build consensus of like, look, hey, you all, this tiny little agency is responsible for all of the like forensic innovation, like all the things you see. Like I had never even heard of an NIJ. I'm like, you all, want to attract great people. So it's not about, it really just dispelling the myth that if you are now somehow inclusive, that you are lowering your standards. So like just kind of fighting against those myths, like, okay, if you are inclusive, now you're all of a sudden not going to get quality quality candidates. But I learned that, you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of this, I'm just like, you're not going to these conferences? Everybody knows that, right? But no, it's not the case. So, I would say for companies, organizations, industry, there's a whole recruiting outreach piece. And then just making sure your hiring practices really align with your mission, right? If you say you're about engaging like top quality and diverse perspectives, then your hiring practices should mirror that. I mean, it's a challenge. They don't mirror that here at AAAS. I mean, nowhere near it. So, AAAS contracted these whole DEI consultants. So you'll see a lot of organizations doing that, and we have to go through the training, right? So those resources are available, but I think it definitely comes from the leadership. It has to be leadership down. Everybody has to buy in and see how it actually connects to morale, productivity, and having an excellent product. If you want an excellent scientific workforce, it has to be inclusive.
Thank you so much, Iris. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to be talking about mental health in STEM, since that was another of the topics that we mentioned. And Wendy, so how can science policy initiatives be designed to prioritize the mental health and well-being of STEM trainees?
They need to be evidence-based. We have plenty of research at the public health level of what actually works to support preventative, proactive, and effective creating mentally healthy communities. We know that. We know these things. This is what drove me from, dropping my pipette and starting a nonprofit, which I'm woefully unprepared to have done. But we did that because I was studying psychiatric epidemiology at Johns Hopkins in the Department of Mental Health at the School of Public Health. And I was just like, we are surrounded by evidence-based activities, initiatives, and things to do, which can be implemented within academic spaces. So we have to build mental health literacy. We have to build skills, supportive skills for self and for supporting your community, especially among faculty, to be able to support trainees in a culturally responsive way. We also need to fight stigma. The number one reason that we are finding, no matter what field we look in, but certainly among biomedical research and STEM in general, is stigma. It's professional and personal stigma that is imbued in the training itself, that says someone can come in with low self-stigma initially, and within 2 years, they change. And they are imbued by the training that they're getting, that it is not okay to have a psychiatric condition or issue. It is certainly not okay to admit that to your advisors, to the people that you are now dependent on for your advancement, for referrals to postdocs or industry jobs, for advancement in your career. So then the other two pieces of that puzzle are peer support is incredibly, incredibly important, both for the preclinical kind of support and ongoing encouragement, as well as development of departmental committees or organizing bodies that include the voices of people throughout the entire career pathway, in order to be held accountable to establish policies that are going to protect people from retribution or abuse or attack if they do blow the whistle on an abuser, or bullying or toxic work environments, or worse, sexual harassment, racism, ableism, any of that sort of stuff. There need to be policies in place. There needs to be accountability, and there needs to be transparency. And all of those things can be done if we create policies around those 5 things. So those are things that are all actionable. But one of the trickiest pieces of the puzzle is that it can't only come from top down. It has to come from a collaborative, ongoing, nuanced sectoring that reflects the community that you're in. So for undergrads, it's going to be different than when you're focusing on graduate students. When you are focusing on junior faculty, it's going to be different. So this is where a lot of organizations will throw their hands up and say, well, I'm the dean of the graduate school. I have 10,000 graduate students at UC Berkeley, for example, that I'm responsible for. How do I do one thing that fixes everything for everybody? And I'm like, you can't. That is just not achievable, and it's not practical. And so anything that you do try is going to be insufficient, even if it's good for a small sector. You have to tailor it, customize it, and create engagement at all levels. There's another kind of crack in the system that makes it very difficult, that is, we're trying to navigate right now and figure out what is the best way around this, is that at universities, we have this system where faculty, and often postdocs, not always, but certainly faculty and staff are treated as staff, and they are separate and they are different, and they are served by different organizational structures and money and systems for their mental health. And that is kept separate from students. So undergrads, graduate students, master's students. And that's a problem because this is actually a contiguous, like interacting, highly codependent set of people within a community. So it's really important for us to address these cracks in the system that have already been created that don't serve the ultimate purpose that we're trying to achieve, which is inclusion, increasing the diversity of the workforce for all of the good and wonderful reasons. If we recruit people that come from underrepresented and historically marginalized communities into the STEM workforce, but as one person that I talked to extensively about this issue described it, they were like, if you are getting fish to put in an aquarium, but they keep dying when you put them in the aquarium, it's not that you don't have enough of those fish in there, it's that there's something wrong with the water. Like, we need to check the water and figure out what that is that is causing the problems. So people with historically marginalized background across the board, it's literally called minority stress in the field of psychiatric and psychological research, that contributes to more than additive effects of belonging to minoritized backgrounds. So it negatively impacting people's mental health. So these are elements of the policy that we need to be talking about, be addressing. Like, the solutions are there, and then we run into problems that people really enjoy saying, like, hands are tied, nothing we can do. Incorrect.
So are there any existing policies or proposals that are being, that are right now going on in universities, and how can policymakers, ensure effectiveness and accessibility of the mental health support across different settings, because if we want to help in the change, we really need to start thinking, okay, how do we implement that support for students?
So there are a lot of universities that are trying to do a lot of things. They're investing a lot of money into care, which the system is pretty bad in the sense that there are, in the US, for example, huge waits for, you have identified yourself as you need psychological care, you need a psychologist, let's say, you're a graduate student, you go to the psychological services, and they triage you and say, okay, well, if you're not in immediate crisis and actively suicidal, you have a 6-week waiting period before you can see somebody for the first time. That is a problem, and it's a very expensive problem to fix. And that's one of the ones that there's a lot of people trying to figure out how to get around this and do things differently. There's, experiments actively going on to increase the access to care. Which is a good thing, but it doesn't stem the tides. From a public health perspective, there's kind of this classic system of, like, if you're downstream and you're seeing, like, people floating down a river, you can stand there at the river and keep trying to pull people out. But if you never walk upstream and find out who's throwing people in the river in the first place, or what bridge fell out and is causing people to, like, drop off into the river and then go downstream, you're never going to address that issue. So that's where there's a lot less activity in the proactive, preventative policy. And that's where Dragonfly is really trying to work heavily with especially STEM folks to raise awareness, to start focusing at that level. But because we are in such a crisis, like 6 to 8 times higher rates of depression, that's 41% of graduate students endorsing that they have serious mental illness, they have depression that needs to be addressed today. So those are issues and balances that are difficult to, you know, get people to think about that at the same time, which we need to be.
So there's a question for that Otto actually has for you. So Otto, you can ask it.
Yeah, Wendy, I know you've been speaking a lot about what universities can do, but as we know, they tend to move depending on what the federal funding agencies say. So I'd be curious.
Yes.
Yeah, what does an NIH, NSF, you know, what could they be doing in this space?
Oh my gosh, they could be doing so much more. We've been talking to NSF, we've been talking to NIH. One of the things that NIH could and should be doing is funding and or requiring their programs that they do fund, like their training programs, the T32s, et cetera, that to include these kinds of policies and activities in place. And so in order to get the funding. So that would be a major step in the right direction, because you know, the preventative stuff costs way less than the care delivery stuff. And so, but at the NIH level and at the NSF level, absolutely, like at the training grant level, that would be a fabulous policy change. And it would be something that not only immediately requires it of all of their grantees, the organizations and the universities and the departments that get those grants, those training grants, they would also create competition among any and every other program that would encourage, like, all right, we got to figure this out. Like, how do we incorporate and include either internally or bring in external people to deliver this kinds of equivalent programming to focus on the mental health of our students, our staff, and our faculty.
Thank you so much. So Dr.
If you want to talk
Wagstaff,
about that, let me know.
Dr. Wagstaff needs to leave, so she wanted to say goodbye, and then I have some questions also for Otto following up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I'm not sure if I answered all the questions, but feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I actually answer questions on LinkedIn. Again, if you're interested in kind of policy work, definitely AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. I kind of like scoped that out for 2 years before I was eligible to apply, but that is what brought me here to do this work at a higher level. And then there are things that you can do now, again, like these types of discussions. You can start like policy groups on your campus. You can start a speakers bureau. I'm most familiar with the NSF as far as the federal program, but they all have something called broader impacts where they engage people from the community. So maybe you can get in on a NSF funded research project to help with the science policy piece. Or if you're interested in STEM education research, that is a way to see if there's an opportunity. You can just search the directory in your state or your city, like what's going on that I can be a part of. So that is definitely an opportunity that I wanted to mention. So
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So Otto, I actually have a follow-up question. So we mentioned, you know, what's going on, the institutions, what funding agencies, but what do you think Congress should be doing to address all the things we talked about here? So,
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot, and for anybody who just, you don't even have to read the whole, you know, article, just read the headlines. You could see Congress is not always the most, you know, well-functioning place. But I think, you know, the policymakers at the end of the day, like they're responsive. And yes, sometimes it's responsive to, you know, maybe who can share the most influence, and that's sometimes resources. But, you know, really at the end of the day, it's, you know, if you're a voter or you're, you know, a member of a community that, in a lot of districts, you know, that institution of higher ed is the largest employer, or, you know, look for those connections where, it was, so and so, maybe it's not the member, but it's their spouse or someone in their family who, worked for a company that, really relied on research and development. So, if you, the importance of, reaching out and calling. I worked in a Hill office for a little over a year. They answer those phones, they answer those letters. Sometimes it might seem like it's form, that you just got a pat response, but a lot of time it's tracking, and if they're getting enough traction on a bill or an issue, they want to be responsive. So that would be my encouragement. If you're not part of the process, then you just get ignored.
Just keep talking about it, make noise, go vote, advocate for everything that you're talking about. So Wendy, there's a question for you in the chat, and everyone, if you have a question, just write it in the chat and I'll read them. So feel free to ask whatever you would like to ask. So Wendy, Kiana asked, does any of the current research show any mental health improvement with PhD students, postdocs, after they leave the academic setting? And are there any mental health resources for postdocs who are still struggling due to high stress environments?
Great question. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of research. As Gary was talking earlier, it is a dearth of research, which is part of the reason why, that's one of the arms of what we do, is conduct our own independent research. But anecdotally, it's a mixed bag. So mental health, specifically illnesses like depression and anxiety, once you've had one, this is the epidemiology of the illnesses themselves. Once you've had one episode of depression, your likelihood of developing another episode of depression at a future time is like, double, if not triple, the general population's risk now of that. So, and then have a second episode, have a third episode, it keeps ratcheting up in that way. So that means that if one has, while in graduate school or undergrad or what have you, developed one of these conditions, the likelihood of it being you having continued and ongoing issues with that condition is higher than had you never had an episode and developed that condition in the first place. So that complicates the question a little bit. Anecdotally, what's kind of interesting is twofold. So one, industry tends to have HR, like really, and if they're a large enough company, if it's not like a startup or something, where it's a little more Wild West, you have an HR department, they often have really competitive like packages to support you. And so they'll have really easy, quick access to care. You'll have any manner of things. So you can do coaching, you can do therapy, you can do psychiatry, like whatever you want. And then they're an employer, so they're not allowed to even ask you about that. Whereas those lines sometimes get crossed quite frequently in the academic setting. And there's not really an HR department that you meaningfully can go to in the academic setting. But one of the problems we have is that we tend to take our culture with us. So I have engaged with folks in industry that have predominantly PhD hires, and people will have 4 weeks of vacation and not take it because they feel the internalized pressure to perform and always be available and always be online and always be answering their emails even when they're on vacation on a beach. So those are it's a double-edged sword where the culture can get imbued in you, and then you'll bring it with you where you go. And if your kind of manager has brought their culture with them from academia, overwork culture, then that can play into the way that they're mentoring as well. So it's not a, if you leave academia, everything will be fine kind of situation, unfortunately.
Thank you, Wendy. So I have a question for Otto in the chat. It says, could you speak a little bit more of the current projects that you are involved in?
Definitely, it does vary pretty widely. But right now, there's just the federal funding process is sort of like a regular process. It does vary from year to year, and again, nobody else could run a budget like the federal government does. But February, March, we usually see the president's budget, so we'll analyze that to see, okay, what are the proposals for NSF, DOE, NIH. As was alluded to earlier, focus a lot more on the Department of Education and Department of Labor. And then it's, that budget gets sent, and then it's up to Congress to decide, hey, thanks for this budget, but we actually have our own prerogatives right now. So you'll see the House, the Senate do their thing. So right now we're in the process of seeing those budgets work out. And yeah, every couple of years you'll see a big effort around, like a Chips and Science Act. It's not something that you see every year. It's going to be, that was a process that was at least 2 or 3+ years, and really had been a multi-year effort to actually lead up to that. We may see something similar in AI. Everybody's trying to position for some AI legislation. Quantum tends to be very popular right now. I've actually even seen the Senate, one of the Senate committees actually just released a white paper on, what should we look at modernizing and changing at NIH. So yeah, it really does vary, but always grounded in what the research education workforce mission is, particularly around institutions of higher education in K-12.
Thank you, Otto. So Gary, there's a question for you. So what purpose, if any, does completing a postdoc serve if you don't want to become a professor or PI?
It's a great question. And I also will sort of add in a little cheeky, what does it serve if you want to be a good professor or PI, or a well-prepared professor or PI? Because this is a major problem, even at faculty report, that, this is something where you are essentially usually continuing to do research, much as you were in grad school, and then you move into an entirely new position, which is managing, mentoring, in the office, writing grants, and a lot of things that you were not explicitly trained to do, but it's assumed you can do. Or teaching, for example. The big problem with teaching is that, research is hard, everything else is easy, particularly teaching. So, and yes, I see the follow-up between industry. So I don't know if this has shifted, but sort of 5 years ago, so I sat on this committee at the National Academies, and it was part of the committee that generated the report Breaking Through about the next generation of researchers. And we had people from industry come in, and we explicitly asked them, why should people postdoc? And they didn't have good answers. This was in a public session, so I'm free to talk about this. They didn't have good answers. I think the most honest answer I heard was someone say, well, postdocs are great because they will put up with anything. But the sort of general received wisdom at the time was that a 2-year postdoc or less was viewed favorably, particularly if it's something that's very related to the technique or problem that you're going to want to work on in industry. I used to work with Xanthopus laevis frogs, and I always used to joke that, there was no way my frog postdocs were ever going to be useful for an industry role because it was not specific and related enough. But after 2 years, you started to go off, was the term. And there is this issue that, and particularly in American academia, I come from the UK, and it's a problem in academia generally, but particularly here, there is very intense competition and very much a focus on being independent and showing how you are the most important intellectually in a project, and that you should only be the first author or the last author. And so there is this very real problem in a lot of careers outside of traditional academia, where essentially the refrain is we have to put these people through kindergarten again because they don't know how to work in a team. They don't know how to work with others. They're not sharing data. They are not pleasant people to work with. And so there is this thing of someone who's been in academia for too long. And, I've just started actually quite randomly in my random career path. I'm now teaching chemistry at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. And I've now been doing education research as part of my consulting work for a few years, sort of learning social sciences, the field around that, around education research and retraining essentially. And then applying that to the teaching. And teaching is very hard and very difficult to do well. And every class is different and every student is different. And, how well prepared you are for teaching as a postdoc. And it was something I was really interested in doing. I was at Harvard Med for 2 years and then Tufts for 2.5, and it was nearly impossible for me, particularly as a foreign researcher, to get any teaching experience, even though I was at a university. I will say, one of the best training programs I think that NIH has is the ERACTA program, also known as the teaching postdoc. And it's so good in particular, not only because it gives pedagogical training, but there are all these positions as like a teaching faculty that people don't know exist, but actually really want to go into. And so it's so good in like for underrepresented populations, and like going to teach at these various places, people like really find their place. So what I've always found, a postdoc is so dependent on who you're working with, because if you work with the right person and in the right setting for what you want to do and are very intentional about it, it can be very great. If that person has connections, if you're working in something that you want to be doing, but that's not how it works across the board. And the purpose of the postdoc is to get the lab work done that people need to be applying for grants. Like they have become the de facto cheap staff scientists. They are cheaper than grad students, or they were. The salary situation might be training, but when you include tuition, they used to be cheaper than grad students and more experienced. So there's a great incentive to like keep people postdocing and to get them to postdoc. And one of the things I used to hear so often, and maybe it's still the case, is, oh, I'll do a postdoc and figure out what I want to do next when I'm there. That's such a bad idea, because you maybe have less time even than you do as a grad student in figuring things out. And so it's a very what I've seen with the industry postdocs, the postdocs actually in industrial places, is they are very intentional. They often do not promise a job at that place, but those people are very highly sought after by other places. There's training. You actually learn how to do things. And just to be particularly cynical about academia, the point is not to put out a paper that hardly anyone can read or nobody can like reproduce. The point is to like do something and do it well and do it robustly. All the people I know who've gone into industry, the common refrain is, oh, they're only in it for the money. But everyone I know who's done it, the first thing they always say is, it's so great that I'm able to do something to help people, where I'm doing science that is robust and is reproducible. And that is the point. The point is not to just produce some piece of academic work that maybe nobody will read but goes on my CV. The point is to actually try and like help people through making a better drug or some better intervention. And so when the goal is to do something like specific, and again, the teaching postdoc is specifically about teaching, and when you might see this pattern of when there's an intentionality behind it beyond just being the staff person on someone's grant, then that is where they can be useful. But as a further point, which I think comes up maybe on the point that's coming through as well, the postdoc is the only position in the academic ladder where you are hired by a single person and you're managed by a single person. At every other stage, when you go apply as an undergrad, when you apply to grad school, and when you apply as faculty, a committee hires you. And you are, within some program or structure or cohort, right? That adds a lot to like what the postdoc is and why it is so variable, why some people have really good experiences and others have terrible ones. And then that comes up with a sort of DEI education training and so many other things, is that because there is no systematic way of doing postdoc training, there is such a range of experiences and such a range of things going on. And I, particularly as someone doing research on undergrads and like mentorship and whether undergrads want to stay in science, I find it kind of weird that we that we have postdocs and grad students who have received no training on mentorship and are probably not getting good mentorship themselves. They're often the ones mentoring an undergrad, and maybe are like being as harmful as the PI is, or picking up those things. And then we're kind of surprised that one of the major exit points for the STEM pathway is retention in STEM majors that undergrads are leaving. So that that sort of addresses, I think, the postdoc grand issue from my perspective.
thank you so much for spending time discussing this topic with us. It was wonderful. We have only 4 minutes left, so I'm going to pass it over to Lauren since she might have some announcements. But I really want to thank the speakers for your time and for everyone for your questions and being here. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. And if you can give your thanks to them in the chat too. Sometimes I always enjoy having folks put their key takeaway as well. It's nice, one, for you to be reminded and for others to see kind of what your key takeaways were, but for panelists to be able to see kind of what insights they provided you all. So see lots of love coming in with chats for you. Real fast, it's going to be really quick. And this is all in the syllabus already. And so we're still kind of easing our way into it. And so we're still working on kind of brainstorming topics that we're going to be doing for our larger write-ups. We're going to continue to work on the policy pieces. And so just keeping in mind, thinking of the things that you'd want to talk about, who maybe you'd want to be writing for. And so just kind of continuing to delve into the material and think about some of these later assignments that are going to be coming up soon. But that is all I have, unless Adriana, I don't know if you have anything else you want to share. We don't have any meetings next week. It is a US holiday next Monday, and so we don't have a meeting next week, but we will reconvene the following. All right. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you for your time.